Hey everybody, it is Patrick Riecke here, and I've been thinking all week about needing to make a video for this weekend, and haven't really had the time, so I'm doing it now. And the reason I'm making this video is because, if you didn't know, Sunday, May 5th this year, always the Sunday before Mother's Day, is National Bereaved Mother's Day. So there's a lot of moms out there who are in grief, who have lost children. The numbers are staggeringly high. 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage or stillbirth, and we see it every day in the line of work that we're in, both my wife and I. So Kristen leads support groups for women who've lost babies, couples who've lost babies, and then at the hospital where I work at Parkview, we support moms who every day who are in the midst of that loss and experiencing that grief and that pain. So I just real briefly wanted to tell our story. So our first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. Stephen would be 18, would have just turned 18 about 2 weeks ago. And we got pregnant really quick after we started trying to. We were very young. We were 22, I think, years old at that time. We're not that age anymore, and Kristen got pregnant really quick. She's 1 of 7, I'm 1 of 6, so we figured having children would probably not be a problem, and getting pregnant wasn't. But a couple appointments in, we went to the doctor. An ultrasound was on tap for that day. We went back for the ultrasound. The tech turned on the machine. There wasn't any sound of any heartbeat. It didn't register for me immediately, and it did register for Kristen right away. And so tears started to roll down her face. I was confused. I didn't get it. Of course, started to break through to me at that point, and then we were led over to see the physician, and the physician said, "I'm so sorry to tell you, your baby's died." And I'm being kind. The physician wasn't terribly gracious. So we found a new one after that, because you need somebody who's going to be gracious and be kind and compassionate in those situations, and our next physician, OBGYN, definitely was. But we were young. Took me especially totally by surprise. It was like getting sideswiped, and I was very sad. We cried a ton. We were bewildered. I yelled at God. My pastor came over. I cried on his shoulder. It was a very painful time. And years later, of course, all of our living children, we have 4 living children, all born after Stephen. And so you would think like his life wouldn't really connect with them, because they weren't even around when he was conceived and when he would have been born. And yet, amazingly, he's a big part of it. They talk about him. They remember him, especially at special times, holidays, Christmas, around the time that he would have been born, anytime someone close to us goes through miscarriage. So he's still a big part of us. So I tell this other story, and I'll wrap up with this. About 3 or 4 weeks after the miscarriage, I was preaching for the Sunday night prayer service at our church, and I talked about our experience. I've always had a hard time not being an open book, so I talked about what had happened. I cried in front of the small group of people gathered there that night. Talked about how I took comfort in realizing that God had also lost a son in Jesus, and that God cares and understands, but that it really hurt, and that we were really struggling. There was a couple in their 80s that were there that night. Hank and Jenny Bernard, just the sweetest couple, kind, compassionate. And Jenny came up to Kristen after the service, and she held her hand, and she kind of patted her hand in a loving way. And she said, "Sweetie, it'll be 50 years this spring since our baby died." And 50 years since our baby died, and I think about him still all the time. And her eyes were wet behind her. She had these large bifocals, and her eyes were wet from hearing our story and thinking about their baby. And these things, guys, stick with us, and they don't just go away. We don't move on, but we do go on. And so my guess is that Jenny, for those 50 years, and Hank, just one step at a time, one step at a time, carrying that child with them still. So on National Bereaved Mother's Day, may you hold a special place in your heart for those moms whose arms either are empty or maybe not quite as full as they would like for them to be. And if you're one of those moms, my prayers and God's grace and God's peace be with you this weekend and always.